Welcome to the D-Shift podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the D-Shift podcast. And today we're going to talk about something that I love because I am a science geeky person. And I really like this whole idea of sort of taking the more nebulous idea of the emotional side of divorce and all the decisions you have to make and combining it with really effective goal setting strategies. So I have an expert with me today on both of those topics, Dr. Robin Buckley. She has a Ph.D. in clinical psychology with a special training in cognitive behavior methodology and executive coaching. Dr. Robin helps people strategically plan their divorce through a specific model that, again, encourages that whole relationship between goals and actual movement that you can make. And I just love this topic. I really do. And the whole focus of our conversation is going to be applying kind of business strategies, right, Dr. Robin, to a goal-focused divorce. And those of you who worked with me know our very first session, we start looking at what are your goals for the next 3 to 5 years. Because like I say, if you don't know where you want to be, you can't make decisions today to help you get there. So before we get in all that, Dr. Robin Buckley, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you find this area of work kind of your niche.
Yeah. So my background, as you said, Marty, is clinical psychology, and I did traditional therapy and all that for years. But what was missing for me was the idea of a proactive, preventative approach, because traditional therapy is more intervention and more in the crisis. And that just didn't align with me professionally or personally. So I simultaneously finished my Ph.D. and got certified as a coach, which back in the day was not even a thing, not even an industry yet. But what I love about it is that when people come into coaching, it's because they have typically at least some goal that they want to achieve. It's not that they're being forced into it or the crisis is so heavy that they feel like they have to do it. And to me, it just makes sense when we start to control our brain's reaction to situations. Then we can really tap into strategy and planning so we actually do achieve our goal in our marriage and relationships or in a divorce.
Yeah, and I love that so much. And that's one of the big things I always tell people is the differentiation between therapy and coaching is coaching starts in the present and works towards the future. Right. And therapy kind of starts in the present, works towards the past to help you with the future. So
exactly.
It's a little bit different.
And it makes it to me, I'm sure it works for some people. And I think therapy is so important, but I think coaching can be a great alternative for people who don't want to necessarily focus on the past. I mean, my perspective is usually we can't change the past. We can't do anything about that. But we certainly can do stuff about the present in order to affect the future.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that, Robin. I think that it's really important for both options to be available. And, for some of my clients, I deal with a lot of people who are in high conflict or abusive relationships. And so the therapy part is really important 100%. For that healing. And that's not really what coaching isn't necessarily on healing at all. It's on moving, and having those specific goals. So,
absolutely. I usually screen my coaching clients that if there's any abuse, addiction, infidelity, recent loss, that those are issues that can be addressed in therapy and then come back. And once you're at a point where you feel more secure with the situation, then we can work in coaching.
Yes. And unfortunately for my clients, if they're in the divorce process, the clock is ticking. And so for them, I think sometimes having a divorce coach who's going to be holding that space for them and who they can come to and just, I don't know what the attorney means when they say, get me XY, documents. I don't even know where to find those. To have somebody who can then sit down and, calmly and strategically say, where have you looked? What access do you have? And again, we are coming back to that whole idea of strategy and goals. And it's so powerful when you're moving through difficult times in life and let's
Agreed.
face it, divorce is one of those,
Mhm.
is to have that goal focus. So can you talk a little bit about that whole idea of a goal focused divorce? Because when you and I first met and you talked about that, I was like, I'm in there with Dr. Robin. I'm right on her team. So tell me a little bit about that, what that means to you and
Yeah.
your clients.
For with my clients, as you know, Marty, with your work, divorce is very painful. I've been through divorce. It is one of the hardest things that I've gone through. Never want to repeat that. And so much of it is generated from the part of our brain that protects us, that tries to protect us, which is the amygdala. And it's that fight, flight, or freeze response. And none of those are helpful in either planning your marriage or in a divorce. Fight, flight, or freeze is a reactive, defensive perspective, and that shuts down the logical part of your brain, the part that can think things through strategically, that can create plans, that can do the emotional regulation. And both of those parts of your brain don't function at the same time. So if your amygdala is firing, your prefrontal cortex, that logic center, shuts down. And thankfully, the opposite is true. If you can get your prefrontal cortex engaged, it shuts down the amygdala, which is when people can really look at emotionally charged situations and still retain logic and still retain the focus on a goal. So, with so much in our life, we have goals, whether it's about our physical health, whether it's about our mental health, whether it's about our careers, our children. We have some clear ideas of where we want to get to. But for many, many people, they get married and they never articulate their goal other than we want to be together forever. I'm like, that is so vague. That is so vague. How are you going to do that? And the same is true in divorce. Well, we're going to get divorced. Okay, but what's the goal in the divorce? The goal in the divorce is not to end the marriage. It's how you're going to end the marriage. What is that going to look like? So that it creates whatever comes on the other side, whether it creates a co-parenting situation that's effective, whether you end up as still being amicable and able to have a friendship, or whether it's complete separation, which is a fine goal to have. But do you want to do it by, in the process, creating trauma and financial debt and just that upheaval that is typically associated with traditional divorces?
And the key that you hit on is, I think any of those three options can be perfectly reasonable.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
nobody, at least nobody that I know, advocates for somebody to stay best
No.
friends or even, amicable with a highly toxic
Of
person.
course not.
And
Yeah.
especially if there's no kids involved, there's no reason to keep those people in your life. But if you have kids, and if they're not one of those outlying, stressful, high conflict people, then it's in your best interest, and it's in your kids' best interest to maintain that civility and that ability to, sit together and celebrate maybe a birthday or a graduation or a wedding or the birth of a grandchild.
Exactly.
You don't want your kids picking one or the other of you to be at those events, because I know if they've got both of you there together, it's going to be a catastrophe. So,
And I have had couples, who didn't have children. And I've worked with them where they say, what, we started as friends, we got married, it didn't work, but we still like our friendship. We
right.
worked better as friends.
Yes.
And so they wanted to retain because there was no toxicity, there was no abuse, they just didn't mesh the way they thought they would. And so their goal is to end up, we still want to be friends. And if you don't have a plan for your divorce, there's a lot of other things that can come into the divorce process that will tear apart that friendship. So exactly, it's whatever your goal is. The goal is not to get, I mean, I know that seems like the overriding goal, and people will tell me that, well, our goal is to get divorced. I'm like, nah, but what's the real goal? What do you want after the
Right.
divorce is finalized? That's the goal. And that's how you really want to engage that logic center of your brain so that you get to that. Because the lawyers or the mediators will help you get to the divorce, but what do you really want the outcome to be?
Yes. And again, so insightful that I recently said this to somebody. The only people that see, well, actually, I think I wrote it on a LinkedIn post, but anyhow, the only people that see divorce as a business, a dissolution of a business, you hear that all the time. Well, divorce is really just the same as dissolving a partnership in a business. It's not, because there's a lot more emotional connection, and there's that sense of loss of what was promised, and I blame this on the way people get married, because you take a vow, you take an oath, right? Till death us do part. I think that's crap. We should not be saying that. We should be saying this. We'll check back in again 5 years and see how this is going.
Yeah. And I agree with part of what you said. I actually do look at divorce as very similar to a dissolution of a business, because in the work that I do really work hard to help couples or individuals um, have a unique space for their emotions. And it isn't in the conversations around the divorce. I mean, to me, when you're going through a divorce, your emotions are yours to manage individually. You're no longer with that person. They're not your
Right.
partner. They're not the person that you're going to go to lean on. But we forget that sometimes because it's a habit. I mean, I watched a recent couple, and the husband kept leaning on the wife, and the wife's like, "We're getting divorced. I'm not here to take care of you anymore."
Yes.
He could not separate that, and that actually created more of the upheaval.
Right.
So it's helping couples maintain the perspective of how would we dissolve a business, and the business is our marriage or relationship, but yet have a place where I can manage my emotions or experience my emotions safely, that doesn't then impinge upon the process of ending the relationship.
And I completely agree with you on that, because that whole idea of the business thing, that's a model that, I mean, the attorneys talk about that. You're going to hear mediators talk about that. But for people that are sitting on opposite sides of the table, where there's already this anger, there's lack of emotional regulation on one or both sides of the table, that's just not feasible for them unless they have somebody strategically working with them, which is where you come in.
Yeah.
So how do you start your clients? Because I'm sure they come into you, right? They're angry, or they're frustrated, or they're worried about the potential for conflict and escalation and long drawn out legal things and all kinds of stuff that people worry about very legitimately. How do you get people to switch from that emotional triggering all the time to actually being strategic and creating those goals, and even talking about what do you want this relationship with your soon to be ex to look like on the other side of this process?
So it starts in my work, the same way I start with couples who are coming in just to improve their relationships or their marriage. And I have them actually create a mission statement. So in this case, it's what's your mission statement for the divorce? And usually if they're not familiar with my model, I get looked at like I'm nuts. And they say, what are you talking about? I'm like, how do you want this to go? If this was a business, what would be your mission, your ultimate goal for this process? And it takes a while because they're not used to talking with each other in agreement. So we work on, okay, but what would it look like? That's usually where I start for each of them. What would it look like? A year after the divorce is over, what would it look like? And whether it's we completely don't talk to each other anymore, whatever it might be. And then I help them frame a mission statement around that. And that becomes a dynamic tool that we go back to when they're struggling, particularly when they're struggling. So any conversation, any behavior, any decision, does it support the mission statement that the two of you created to achieve your goal in the ultimate end result of the divorce? So it becomes something that when emotions start to escalate, when one person is trying to maybe go after something that is more out of ego rather than out of a realistic perspective, we go back to the mission statement. Does this support the mission statement? And it certainly can be, if that happens over and over, do we need to revise the mission statement? Is it not exactly what we're looking for now? But it becomes almost that compass of where are we going? And does everything you're doing, saying, thinking about support that mission statement? I usually encourage couples to have a copy of that mission statement with them, whether it's on their phone or posted on their laptops, so that they can refer to it, just like you do in business. You refer to that mission statement to say, okay, where are we actually aligned? Because as you and I both know, Marty, divorce just divides people. And I get why, again, been there. But in those situations, it's trying to get them to unify around a shared direction, a shared mission, because that's what will keep some of that emotional reactivity lower.
And I'm guessing, thank you for that. That's a really great explanation. And I think it's a great exercise, especially for couples that are fairly amicable, where you're not dealing with a difficult person, or even if you are dealing with a difficult person, but a difficult person who's willing to work with you is one thing. And I think that a lot of times, well, I'm guessing, and I may be wrong, but I'm guessing a lot of times those mission statements focus on the health and well-being of their children, if there's kids involved.
It could, yes, certainly if it's the kids, then yes, I very often see that framed. But again, even if it's, we want to get through this as quickly as possible, as respectfully as possible, and with the end result of us both leading individual lives. That, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was a mission statement that a couple used. They didn't like each other anymore. They were angry with each other for various reasons, but they didn't want it dragged out through the course. They didn't want it to go on for years because of the emotional and financial toll. They just wanted to be done as
Right.
quickly as possible and as again, amicably as possible. So they weren't saying they were coming out as best friends. They weren't saying like we want to be nice to each other. They just wanted it over. And that became built into their mission statement. And that's great and fine. Again, my goal is not to like have everybody doing a kumbaya dance after they're divorced. It's how do you want it to look? How do you want what do you want this experience to be while you're going through something that is very challenging? Even when it's in agreement and mutual and all that, it's still hard.
Yeah.
So how do you want this to really go forward?
And when people are doing this mission statement, do you find that they're typically at the early part of their divorce, or do they come to you, say, once they thought it was going to be amicable and it starts going south, because that can happen really quickly? Somebody says something that triggers somebody else, and that's all it takes, right? It just starts that cycle. So where do people typically come into you at what point in the divorce process?
I've worked with both, where some are coming in a very proactive way. Very often, those are clients that worked with me in their marriage, and unfortunately, the strategies just didn't work for them because there were other issues that just could not be resolved.
Right.
And so they want that proactive approach to their divorce. But I've also worked with couples. Some divorce attorneys have sent them my way saying, look, this is getting just out of hand, or, we know some divorce attorneys are really the opposite of the stereotype, and
Yes,
they actually
yes.
don't want it to be acrimonious. So they say, why don't you go start with Dr. Robin, and then let's come back to the table after you do some work with her. So it really comes down to whether a couple is willing to make a divorce effective rather than personal. And if they can choose that we want this to be as effective as possible, those are the couples that this model works with really, really well.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask you a question that may be putting you a little bit on the spot, Dr. Robbins. So if you don't want to answer, don't
Oh,
worry.
please.
Just say, I'm going to pass on that one. I recently interviewed a therapist who is she works with couples in high conflict divorce situations to try to create some sort of managed separation to at least get them out of that environment and to be able to calm down and maybe think through some things. And of course, she works with them on all kinds of other things at the same time. But one of the things that she said is that traditional therapy for couples that are already at the point where it's like, we're going to therapy, you either change or we're getting a divorce, has like one of the highest failure rates of any kind
Great.
of intervention. Is
100%.
that accurate?
Absolutely. That's why I stopped doing couples therapy. Because it just, most of the time, again, people are coming into couples therapy as a last resort and as an intervention. And at that point, one or both has already made the decision that this is over. And they're checking the boxes to know that they've done everything possible, even though they're not fully engaged. And I will be incredibly candid and transparent. That was me in my divorce, that I knew it was over. It had probably been over a year for me
Right. Right.
before the conversations were actually finally heard by my significant other. And I just was going through the motions knowing, okay, then I can walk away knowing that we quote unquote tried everything.
Right.
So that, yeah, that's therapy. I think couples therapy works really well almost when it's used as a couples coaching model where people are like, you know what, things just aren't feeling good. and we're not where we want to be. So we want to take that preventative measure. But I don't think a lot of people see couples therapy that way. They think of it when things are really bad because life keeps rolling and then they don't realize how bad it is. And now they're going for therapy, and that's
Yeah.
hard.
And it's funny when you said it that way, because I also have done executive and leadership coaching in the past, and I refused to take cases
Mhm.
where I was hired as a coach because if that person didn't improve, they were going to be fired. I just said,
Exactly.
nope, I'm going to pass on that one.
Because they're not really invested. They're not there because they want to be there. They're there because it's a last ditch.
Yeah.
And how do we think things are going to improve when people are, whether they're forcing themselves or being forced into that situation? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be here. So yeah.
Let me ask you one other question. What do you think? And we're almost out of time. I can't believe how fast
How is
these
that possible?
conversations go. What do you see a shift with? And I don't know how old you are, and I don't need you to tell me. I'm older than you, and there was when I went through my divorce almost 30 years ago, you really didn't have any option. You went to an attorney, and maybe if things were really bad, you talked to a therapist. That was really the only professionals that were involved. Do you see a shift with younger people, like say people in their 30s and 40s that are divorcing now, that they are actively seeking alternatives to the traditional hire an attorney, lawyer up, and then go at the person with guns blazing? Do you see a real shift in that
I
for people
do.
coming?
Yeah, I do. My clients, I'm seeing where there's younger and younger. Although on the flip side, I'm seeing more younger and younger clients coming to see me for the marriage and relationship side, which is very exciting to me.
Yes.
But what I'm seeing and I'm really inspired by is these collaborative companies where they're pulling in multiple professionals, a financial advisor, a therapist,
Yeah.
maybe one attorney, not two, one
Right.
attorney, but they're coming in with this group team perspective, like a multidisciplinary team
Right.
that counsels the two people so that again they're getting all the necessary information, all the necessary perspectives that are there for them. And when I say them, I talk about it as marriage or divorce. That's the client. The marriage or the divorce is the client, and the two people are the participants
Right.
to make whatever happen. So the multidisciplinary team is really there for the support of the client. In this case, divorce. And I
Right.
think it works so well if people really buy into that idea of, again, what's our end goal? Our end goal is to do this. And I think most people want it done quickly. They want it done as smoothly as possible, however you want to define smooth. And if that's your goal, it's achievable. It doesn't have to be the way we've always thought about divorce, just like marriages don't have to be the way we've always thought about marriage and commitment.
Exactly. Exactly. And collaborative law is one of those, I think it's one of those options that really works well for people that are on the, I'm going to say, low to moderate level of conflict. I think when you get like to the really high conflict where you're dealing with those toxic people, if unfortunately, if things don't work out in the collaborative law process, you have to fire all of those
Yeah,
professionals. None of
that is
them can
true.
work with you in the future.
Right.
So it tends to be, I tend to see it used very, very effectively on the low to moderate level
Mhm.
conflict
Agree.
relationships. And people walk out of there, they know what they've did, why they've made the decisions. They know the long-term tax implications on everything they've done.
Yeah,
And they have that positive experience of working through a very difficult time together. So I couldn't agree with you more on that one.
I agree.
Before we wind this up, though, you have a book that has just come out. Can you tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about your book, please, Dr.
I'm,
Rob?
oh, Marty, I'm glad you asked. Thank you, because I'm so excited about it. So the title is Marriage Incorporated. And because, like I said, my focus is typically working with people in relationships and or in marriages that they want to make work. But we do come at it from a strategic point of view. We apply business principles that work so well with businesses and in companies, and we apply them into the relationship. So it doesn't detract from the romance and the love. It enhances it because we are working from strategy and plans instead of just the Disney Hallmark version of, our rom-com saying, oh, it's fate and it's destiny. I'm like, no, it's not. Not if you
Right.
want it to work, because we still know the divorce rate is still about 50%. And what I also know is that younger generations, the Gen Z, only 29% of Gen Z actually see marriage as a viable option. I'm like, okay, it's not because of them. It's because we're doing this wrong. We're not
Right.
creating the plans that we do for everything else in our life. So I help couples create a plan, create a strategy so that their relationships just continue to improve.
Oh, and I can see, even for somebody that's gone through a divorce, I think a
Oh
book
yeah,
like that would be incredibly helpful because
exactly.
it's going to give you a strong foundation when you're ready to move into that next
Yes.
relationship. If you choose, you have a book that can actually guide you through the conversations to have with your prospective partner. I think it's
Yes.
fantastic. I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing it, Dr. Rob.
It was a
That's
pleasure.
amazing. I can't wait to read it. I've got a copy that's going to be on order, and now I'm going to be taking a look through it. Although
Terrific.
I'm happily single, not intending on anything,
Oh,
but
good.
good to
That's
have
okay
knowledge.
too.
Good to
That's
have knowledge.
wonderful. Hmm.
Out of all the things that we've talked about, and you've shared a wealth of information, what is the takeaway you want people to keep top of their mind when they go about their busy day today?
Yeah, I think the most important, easy takeaway is when you think about your life, how much of your life do you plan? I mean, we plan our tip for most of us, we plan when we go to the grocery store and what we're going to buy. We plan road trips, we plan vacations, we plan so much of our life because we want to get to an end result. We want to achieve success, or at least 80% of success. But when it comes to marriage or when it comes to a divorce, most people wing it, and it astounds me. So, what would happen if we looked at our relationships, whether it's the beginning of a relationship, the middle of a relationship, or unfortunately the end of a relationship, with a plan, the way we plan the rest of our life? I think we'd achieve a lot more success.
I couldn't agree with you more. If people want to find out more about what you do or reach out to see if you are available for them to work with, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is probably through my website. It's really easy. Dr. Robin Buckley, all one word.com. I'm also on a lot of social media, so LinkedIn, Instagram, and TikTok, so they can find me there.
I'll make sure all of that information gets in the show notes. Dr. Robin, thank you so much for being here. I love this whole idea of a goals-driven marriage, because I'm pro-marriage, believe it or not. And I'm also excited about a goals-driven divorce process where you're creating that mission statement and then working together. I think that is fantastic. So
Thanks,
thank you
Marty.
so much for sharing that.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of The D Shift. And don't forget to tune in again next week. Thanks for listening and supporting the D Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.